So in TTRPGs, Fighter is pretty well known as the best damage dealer in any system. But how easy is it to build towards teamwork? Well, if we're talking any other system other than Pathfinder 2e, it's very difficult. But in Pathfinder 2e, it's completely different. There is definitely a reason why I put Fighter in A tier on my teamwork tier list. For today's teamwork build, we're building a dual-wielding fighter. Let's dive in. So today's ancestry is going to be a human Gonzi. We're going to be dual wielding, so that means we won't have access to a free hand to use our athletics. But the Gonzi has a feat that will allow us to trip upon us even though we're dual wielding. We're only going to be taking one human feat for this build, but I'll get to that when we get to ancestry feats. Then for our background, we're going to go with the farmhand background. I know that's pretty old school, but having assurance with athletics is going to help us against weaker enemies. Before I get into feats, I should talk about the starting stats. We will need a strength of 16, a dexterity of 14, a constitution of 10, an intelligence of 10, a wisdom of 14, and a charisma of 14. This build is pretty mad, that's why we need so many ability scores. That's also the reason we're going human instead of a different ancestry which we're going to be taking ancestry feats from. Because when a build is mad like this one, it's generally better to take a ancestry that doesn't give you a -2 an ability score. So our first class feat is going to be combat assessment. Or if you don't have the free archetype, you'll want to take double slice here. But as usual, we are going to go for the free archetype, so combat assessment is the better choice for this build. So we get to make an attack, and if we hit, we can make a recall knowledge check as part of that attack. And if we crit on this strike, we get a +2 on our recall knowledge. And we're a fighter, so we're going to crit a lot. So we're going to get that +2 very often. Moving on, our next feat is going to be Intimidating Strike. So we get to make a strike, and if we hit and deal damage, the opponent is frightened 1. And if we crit, then they're frightened 2. We don't even have to roll intimidation for this. As long as we hit, they're frightened. We still want to be good at intimidation though, because there are certain things we can do with intimidation skill feats that we can't do with this feat. Next, we're going to want to pick up Twin Parry. This will give us a +1 to AC until the end of our next turn for an action. Or if we're using at least one weapon with the parry trait, then that bonus increases to +2. This will give us a little more defense. We're going to be wanting to use 2 agile weapons here, and some of them do have the parry trait. So if we can get a hold of at least one weapon that has that, all the better. Alright, then we have Shatter Defenses. So we get to make a strike against a frightened creature. If we hit, then that creature is flat-footed until its frightened condition ends. And if they were already flat-footed to you when you hit them with this strike, then they can't reduce their frightened condition below 1 until the start of your next turn. This feat does have the press trait, so we gotta be suffering from a multiple attack penalty in order to use this. But this will combo extremely well with our Intimidating Strike feat we took earlier. So we can Intimidating Strike and then use this feat to give our opponent at least a -3 to AC and a -1 to everything else. Very good combo for any fighter to pull off. Next up is Disorienting Opening. So whenever we hit a foe with our Attack of Opportunity reaction, they become flat-footed until the start of our next turn. This is simply a way for us to get the flat-footed condition on enemies that we're not targeting. Plus, if we miss with Shatter Defenses, this is another way we can get the flat-footed condition, which the rogue in the party will love. And now we come to the reason why we want to use agile weapons. Agile Grace will make our multiple attack penalty with agile weapons a -3, -6 rather than -4, -8. This essentially gives us the Flurry's Hunter's Edge for Ranger, but only for agile weapons. This feat is simply to help us hit with all our feats that have the press traits. Fearsome Brute will allow us to do more damage against frightened creatures. We deal bonus damage equal to twice the creature's frightened value against those creatures. Also, if we have Master Proficiency in Intimidation, which we're going to need for one of our Ancestry feats anyway, we deal triple the frightened value extra damage. Keep in mind, this is all of our damage against frightened creatures. That means this even applies to our Shadow Defenses strike. Very, very handy. We're going to be taking the Ranger archetype for our free archetype, so we're going to want to pick up additional Recollection. This will give us 2 recall knowledges for the price of 1 whenever we succeed at recall knowledge against our hunted prey. There isn't really a good teamwork feat for this build at this level, so that's why we're taking this here. At 16th, we'll be picking up Graceful Poise. This is a stance, and while we're in this stance, if we make the second strike from Double Slice with an agile weapon, then Double Slice counts as 1 attack for our multiple attack penalty. We'll be picking up Double Slice on the free archetype side of the class feats. So with this feat, it's essentially no penalty, -3, -3. This will allow us to do damage even more effectively than we are already doing, for when we just really need that damage. Alright, next up is Stance Savant. This will allow us to go right into our Graceful Poise stance when we roll initiative, instead of having to spend an action on it. That way we can use our third action for other things, like Recall Knowledge. And our last feat from this side of the free archetype is Weapon Supremacy. This will quicken us, but we can only use the extra action to strike. There really isn't a good Teamwork 20th level feat for Fire that we can take here, so we're just going to pick up an extra action to strike. Okay, now it's time for the free archetype feats. First things first, we need to take our Dual Weapon Warrior dedication. This is how we'll pick up the Double Slice feats. And I was wrong, sorry. When we pick up Graceful Poise, our multiple attack penalty will actually be no penalty, no penalty, -3, and then when we pick up Weapon Supremacy, our last attack will be at -6. But yeah, with Double Slice, we make 2 attacks with our current multiple attack penalty. We have to hit the same target with both strikes. But yeah, we want to use agile weapons for this build so we don't take the penalty from this feat and we take less of a multiple attack penalty. Next, we're going to want to pick up Dual Thrower. So whenever a Dual Weapon Warrior feat allows you to make a melee strike, you can instead make a ranged strike with a one-handed ranged weapon or a thrown weapon. Also, any feats that apply to one-handed melee weapons and melee strikes also apply to one-handed ranged weapons and ranged strikes. This feat right here is why we need a high dex. We are not always going to be able to be in melee combat, but this feat will allow us to apply some of the effects of our feats to one-handed ranged weapons like hand crossbows. Feats like Twin Parry are going to be especially helpful. We want to be just about as effective with ranged weapons as we are with melee weapons. Speaking of which, our next feat is going to help with that as well. Dual Weapon Reload will allow us to reload even though we're dual wielding. Since most one-handed ranged weapons require a reload action, this feat will allow us to reload even if we don't have a hand free. In a build like this, most of the time we're not going to have a hand free. Now we can take our second dedication, the Ranger dedication. This will give us training in survival or another skill, and the Hunt Prey action. The main thing we care about here is the no range penalty thing. For Hunt Prey anyway. Plus, we need this to take other feats in this line. Now let's talk about Monster Hunter. Now we can make a Recall Knowledge as part of our Hunt Prey action. In addition, our allies are going to gain a +1 bonus on their next attack roll against that creature. This won't give our allies quite as much of a chance to hit and crit as us, but close. Plus, we get this bonus as well, so we have even greater of a chance to hit and crit than we did before. We do have to critically succeed on our knowledge check to get this, but that's why we need our wisdom to be high. Because with high wisdom, we have a pretty good shot of critically succeeding as long as we get to roll nature or religion for our recall knowledge. Next, we're going to want to pick up Monster Warden. Whenever we get to get bonuses from Monster Hunter, we also give everyone affected a +1 on their saving throws against that creature and to their AC against that creature's next attack. This will allow us to give us and our allies offense and defense whenever we critically succeed on a recall knowledge check. Of course, both of these last 2 feats just give us an incentive to actually use recall knowledge, which I know a lot of people don't. And it's a shame too, because it's a great teamwork option that more people should take. With dual onslaught, if we miss both attacks with double slice, we can treat it as though we hit with one of our weapons. We get to choose which weapon as well. If we quickly failed the attack roll with one of our weapons, we can't use this feat with that weapon. So we can't use this feat if we quickly failed to hit with both weapons. This is mainly for those really high AC foes that we just need to do damage to. And remember, thanks to our dual thrower feat, this feat is going to apply to our ranged attacks as well. That means we can use this feat even if we have to keep our distance, or if an enemy is out of our melee range. We obviously want to be in melee with most foes. However, that's not always going to be possible. That's why our dex and this feat are so important. Alright, time for Hunter's Luck. This will give us the Monster Hunter's Luck focus spell. So we can use this spell whenever we're about to attempt a recall knowledge check. When we do, we get to roll twice and take the better results. We're not going to have a high intelligence score, so this is going to help us when we have to roll more intelligence-based skills for recall knowledge. Plus, if we really need to know about a creature, like its weaknesses or whatever, then this will give us double the chance to actually succeed on our recall knowledge. Alright, Twin Defense will give us another stance. While we're in this stance, we constantly gain the benefits of Twin Parry. Remember, we have stance savants. That means if we need to fight a more defensive battle, then we can go straight into this stance as part of our initiative. We're just going to need some more defense against some foes. This feat will let us get that defense without having to spend an action every turn to benefit from Twin Parry. And remember, thanks to Dual Thrower, we can use this feat with one-handed ranged weapons as well. And the last class feat for this build is going to be Master Monster Hunter. This feat will allow us to use nature to recall knowledge on any creature. Also, we'll gain the benefits of Monster Warden and Monster Hunter if we succeed and not just critically succeed. This makes Wisdom even more important to this build, because now we can use Wisdom to recall knowledge about creatures all the time, instead of having to rely on our lower intelligence for some creatures. Alright, time to talk about Ancestry feats. First up, we have General Training. We want to pick up Adopted Ancestry for this. And we want to be adopted by gnolls. This is the only human feat we're going to be taking in this entire build. We want to be as close to a gnoll Gonzi as we can, but we don't want that minus to Wisdom. This will allow us to take feats from the gnoll Ancestry as long as they don't have physical requirements we lack. Next at 5th level, we'll want to take Skillful Tail from our Gonzi heritage. We have a tail that we can use to perform simple interact actions. We can't hold anything with our tail, and we can't use it to accomplish any action that will require a check. However, during combat, we're going to have our hands full. That means having an extra appendage for interact actions is always going to be good. Next, we want to pick up Laughing Gnoll. This feat will essentially give us the Battle Cry feat and the Intimidating Glare feat for one feat. That means we can intimidate our foes right at the start of combat, and we don't take a penalty if the opponent does not understand our language. This build requires quite a few skill feats, and we're not a rogue, so we're not going to get a ton of them. But this will free up 2 slots for other feats. And like I said before, some intimidation skill feats will let us do things that Intimidating Strike won't let us do. Now for the real reason we took Skillful Tail. Mischievous Tail will allow us to trip and disarm opponents with our tail, even if we don't have a hand free. Otherwise, the restrictions of Skillful Tail still apply. Disarm isn't good in Pathfinder 2e, it's just not. So we're mostly going to want to use this feat to trip our opponents. This is where Assurance and Athletics is going to help us out, especially against lower leveled opponents. We are dual wielding, so we won't have a hand free, and we probably won't be using weapons with the trip traits. But we want to at least try to trip them sometimes, because our feats that make our opponent flat-footed aren't always going to work. Plus, if our opponent is on the ground, that means they're going to have to get back up. This will provoke an attack of opportunity, which will allow us to use our disorienting opening feats. And then for 17th level, we'll want to take Arise Ye Worthy. This will allow us to cast Breath of Life as an innate divine spell once a day. So if one of our allies dies, boom, we can bring him back. Yeah, it's only a once per day thing, but to be honest, you're really not going to need this more than once a day. Even at as high a level as 17. Unless of course we're talking about the final boss of the campaign. That's different. Alright, for general feats, if your GM allows it, you're going to want to take Ancestral Paragon twice here. Otherwise, you're going to pick one of the 2 Ancestry feats we're going to gain and replace it with fleets. So the first Ancestry feat we want to pick up is Natural Ambition, and we want to pick up Sudden Charge for that feat. That feat will enable us to move twice and make an attack for 2 actions. So we can get right up in there and do what we need to do. The second Ancestry feat we want to pick up is Hyena Familiar. We need a Familiar for this build, mainly for the Second Opinion Familiar ability. This will allow our Familiar to aid us on recall knowledge checks. We will need to take the skilled Familiar ability to take this, so that's going to take up all of our Familiar abilities. But that's all we really need our Familiar for anyway. Until we can take Master Monster Hunter, we're going to need a little help with intelligence-based recall knowledge checks. So that's why we need a Familiar. After that, we'll just take the standard Die Hard, Toughness, and Canny Acumen for our will saves. Alright guys, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more Pathfinder 1 and 2e teamwork content. You can also check out my Patreon page in the description below. Unfortunately, some issues have come up, so you guys will probably only see me once a week for a little while. But after that, I'll be back with a vengeance, especially once I get my hands on the Book of the Dead. So you guys can look forward to that. Remember, teamwork is vital, and I'll see you guys next time.